Yo, what's going on guys? Hanging Hunt Outdoors here. My name is Dimitri, and in today's video we are continuing on with the most in-depth arrow guide for building the most accurate arrows. This is going to be part 3. If you guys missed the previous videos, we have 1 and 2 out. In the first video we just go over speeds, target arrow weight, how to figure out all that stuff. And then in the second part, which was last video, we went over how to actually choose the arrow shaft depending on what application you plan on shooting the arrow in. And in today's video, we're going to be going over how to choose the Aerospine that you need and the components that you're going to need. So you guys ready? Let's get into it. Alright guys, so jumping right into things, the first thing that we're going to go over is Aerospine. So Aerospine refers to how hard it is to flex or bend the arrow shaft. The spine is going to dictate how the arrow flies dynamically out of your bow. So depending on your poundage, how long the arrow is, how much point weight you have in the front. Let's say that you have a 75-pound bow and a weak Aerospine with the point weight up front. When the string pushes on that arrow, the point is going to want to stay where it is, and the arrow is going to flex. So as a right-handed shooter, a spine that is too stiff, more often than not, is going to give you a right tear or is going to impact right, and then vice versa. If a spine is too soft, it's going to give you a left tear if you're a right-handed shooter and go and impact left. Now, these are just broad terms. Obviously it might be a little bit different depending on how you are, but just in a broad scheme of things, that's usually how it goes. So before you can figure out what spine you need, you're first going to need to figure out how long your arrow needs to be. You'll also have to figure out the amount of point weight that you want to add to the front of the arrow. For starters, let's talk about arrow length. So you're going to take an old arrow, an arrow that's a little bit longer, draw length, like a buddy's arrow, an uncle's arrow, a dad's arrow. Any arrow will work. Make sure that they have standard non-lighted nocks. What that's going to do is just going to give you the shortest measurement possible. Lighted nocks tend to be a little bit longer, and that can actually decrease arrow size. If you then go from a lighted nock to a standard nock measuring, it can just make it a little bit shorter, and you might actually impact your rest if you cut your arrow too short. Obviously, there are many opinions on how far it should stick out. Now, if you plan on shooting strictly target or 3D, I would recommend cutting your arrow down as short as possible without impacting your rest. The reason why I say that is because if you have less arrow out in front of your rest, the point of the arrow is going to have less leverage to throw the back of the arrow out of square. So as you can see here, if the point of the arrow, let's say my fingers are the rest, if it's sticking out this much past it, as you can see, if the point's out of square just by a little bit, it will actually start to influence and have leverage on the back of the arrow, causing it to destabilize and give you group consistency issues. So that's why for target in 3D, I would suck the point of the arrow as close to the rest, which is my fingers here, as possible. If you're shooting, if you're going to be hunting and you plan on using fixed blade broadheads, which I will always recommend, and what I'm going to be using as well, I would recommend keeping the end of the arrow flush with the shelf of the bow. And the reason why I say that is because it just gives you a little bit of wiggle room to grip the bow however you like, because obviously I grip a bow a little bit different than you're going to. So it just gives you a little bit of wiggle room so that you can grip the bow however you want, and you're not going to take a finger off while you take your shot. So that's the reason why I say that. Just keep the end of that arrow right in line with the shelf. So now that you have that arrow that's going to be a little bit longer than your draw length or like an old arrow, go ahead and get a friend, because you're going to need their help. Draw your bow back in a safe direction and then have them mark the arrow, like I was just saying, depending on your application, have them mark it where you so please, and then we'll go from there. So now that you have that number, go ahead, grab a tape measure, and you can mark it from the carbon on the back of the arrow. So basically people will say C to C, that means carbon to carbon, so you would measure it from the carbon on the back of the nock here to the carbon on the front of your arrow. You can see the carbon up to there, that's where you'd measure. And then a lot of people also do the throat of the nock to carbon, which is it's my preference on how I like to do things. So I will go ahead and measure it right from the throat of that nock. And that is just where I like to measure it. Go ahead and measure it up to that line, and then record the number. And obviously this is just a starting point, but it gives us a rough idea of how long our arrow needs to be. You don't want to go ahead and cut all your arrows to that, because the insert-outsert system that you plan on using might actually change your length. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and go to your arrow manufacturer on their website. The majority of the arrow manufacturers now will have a spine chart on their website. And you're going to go ahead and find your arrow and your arrow length on there, as well as your draw weight, and see what spine your arrow needs to be. Now go ahead and just put this in as if you were using a 100 grain field point. The reason why we do this is because although we don't know how much point weight we're going to be adding to reach our target arrow weight, it's still going to give us a rough idea of what our grains per inch or GPI will be. Then look at the specs of the arrow shaft that you're going to be using. So as an example, I am shooting Easton Axis long range arrows. These are the 4mm version, and these are also the match grade version. And the GPI for a 300 spine arrow, which these are, is 9.4 grains per inch. And they actually have them printed on the arrow shaft. And yeah, 9.4 grains per inch for these specific arrows. Every arrow is going to be different, so just look at the specs and you should be able to find it. Then what you're going to do is you're going to get the GPI of your arrow shaft, and you're going to multiply it by the length of your arrow in inches. So for example, I cut these, I want these to be 28.5. So I do 9.4 times 28.5, and that will give me my bare arrow shaft weight. Alright guys, so now that we have that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and figure out some of the other components of our arrow shaft here. For example, we're going to be looking at the vanes that we're going to be using, as well as the quantity of them. We're going to be looking at the nocks, because although they don't add much weight, it is important. And we're going to be looking at the field points, because these are going to be playing a pretty big role in the point weight that we add to our arrows. Alright, so let's talk about the vanes that we're going to be running first. We made a video not too long ago going over some of the most popular vanes on the market, such as the AAE Max Stealth, the Boning Heat vanes, and these, which I'm running right now. So in my experience, there isn't really a great do-it-all vane. They come in many shapes and sizes, and they all have their own advantages and disadvantages. If you're looking to build hunting arrows or jack-of-all-trade arrows like I am right here, these are my jack-of-all-trade arrows. I'm going to be hunting, shooting some occasional target in 3D with these things. I would stick with a vane that's around 2 3/4 to 3 inches in length and around a 1/2 inch in height. The bigger the vane, the more it's going to help steer a fixed blade broadhead, which obviously I will always recommend for hunting. So that's why I chose these guys right here. And I will always recommend with arrow vanes going as stiff as possible. That's why I liked these vanes. These are the, again, the Tack Driver 2.75. The reason why I like these is because they're almost a hard plastic. These things are super stiff, and the reason why I like stiff vanes is because they're going to be pretty quiet. These are some of the most quiet vanes on the market right now, these Tack Drivers, as well as the stiffer the vane. This could be just marketing. I've never actually tested this, but I've heard that the stiffer the vane, it will actually have less drop at longer ranges. It'll have less speed loss at longer ranges because it doesn't have as much turbulence flying through the air to slow it down. So if you plan on shooting 3D, I would recommend a vane that's roughly 2.5 inches or less, as well as 3/8 inches in height. And I would go for a vane that is as stiff as possible. Now the reason why I say that is because that small profile is really going to help when it comes to crosswinds, like pushing your arrow over. Now if you're shooting indoor target, I would recommend a vane that's 3 to 3.5 inches, as well as a 1/2 inch in height. And in this case, I would actually prefer a softer vane. Now, the reason why I say that is because the softer vanes tend to be a little bit more forgiving. So you're going to have a very forgiving shot in an indoor scenario, as well as the softer vanes steer the arrow a little bit faster. So they'll take right over and help steer that arrow the second it leaves the bow. As well as the softer vane, you don't really care about that speed loss that can happen, because in a target situation, you're dialed in at 20 yards, 56 yards, you're dialed in at basically everything. So you don't really have to worry about, the speed loss, because you're just shooting at a known distance. So now we all know the debate, 3 vanes, 4 vanes. Some people have put 6 vanes on their arrows. I run three fletch in any configuration in any application. Three fletch is tried and true. It works. It provides plenty of drag to stabilize your arrow. Of course, this is my preference. This is just what I found to work best. If you guys have a configuration that works really great for you guys, by all means do it. But yeah, this is just my preference. So once you have picked an arrow vein that suits your application well, I would figure out the quantity of them, figure out how much the weight is, and then multiply that number by the amount of veins that you plan on using, and go ahead and jot that number down. So once you have that number down, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what nocks we're using. Now I know nocks, they're not that important to some people. If you plan on using a lighted nock, they can be upwards of 10 to 12 grains, and that adds a significant amount of weight to the back of the arrow. It can steal a decent amount from your FOC. So for me, I'll be using the standard Easton Microlight nocks. These are the orange ones. I believe they're like stupid light too. They're only like 4 grains or something like that each nock. Now, if you're shooting target or 3D, there are a variety of nock bushings and nocks. Now, that's all personal preference. I don't have much experience in that realm. However, nock bushings can be super beneficial in a 3D scenario. They just help from other arrows impacting and like breaking or chipping your arrow. The nock bushing kind of just like deflects it. So if you're shooting for groups in like target, or if you're shooting 3D, that can be super beneficial and just save you an arrow. But once you figure out what you want to use, whether it's for target hunting 3D, nock bushing and nock, or just straight up these standard nocks that you get with your arrows, go ahead and figure out how much that weighs. All right, guys, so last but not least, let's talk about point weight. Now, I know point weight may seem simple to you guys, but you can get field points that weigh 75 grains. You can get field points that weigh 300 grains. There's so many options out there. And the one that I would recommend is the 100 grain field point. Now, I know that might be like, that's the most standard, that's the most, like common point weight that there is. And that's exactly the reason why I would choose one. There is just way more fixed blade aftermarket support for 100 grain broadheads than there is any other weight. So that's why I like the 100 grain field points. You can pretty much find broadheads anywhere. Now, using a standard 100 grain field point will also allow you to use aftermarket insert-outsert systems like the one that I'm currently using on this arrow build. This is the Ethics Archery Insert-Outsert system. So it's got a stainless insert that goes down into the arrow shaft, an aluminum outsert that goes about a ½ inch over the arrow shaft, making this whole system super strong. But I would also recommend it just for the ability to really fine-tune and hone in your point weight to get your overall arrow weight right. So once you have figured out what point weight you want to use, whether or not it's 100 grain or not, just figure out which weight you want to use. And then we're going to take our point weight, bear shaft weight, vein weight, and nock weight, and we're going to add them all together. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that number and we're going to subtract it from our target arrow weight that we figured out in the first part. This is going to give you a rough estimate of what your insert-outsert system weight should be. Now, there are two pretty good insert-outsert system manufacturers that I've used in the past: Iron Will and Ethics. Now, Iron Will is more on the pricier side, but they make some great stainless insert-outsert products. For this build, I opted to go for Ethics Archery. So whatever number you get from subtracting your overall arrow weight from your target arrow weight, that's the outsert system that you're going to want to get. Now, it doesn't have to be exact. As long as it's pretty close, you should be good. So now that you have your insert-outsert weight figured out and your point weight, now what you're going to do is you're going to see if your point and insert weight that you added still matches up with the Aerospine that you chose. So one of the reasons why I like Easton is because they kind of open their eyes to the FOC and people who like to have a little bit of weight in the front of their arrows. They kind of open their eyes to that growing market, and they now offer with instead of like a spine chart, you basically just type in everything that you want to add in to your arrow, and it'll spit you out a spine that you want to use. Now, other manufacturers offer different ways to try to figure this out. They'll tell you that like for every 15 grains of point weight, add 3 pounds to your bow, something along those lines. So there are many ways that you can try to figure out if the spine's still correct. So now that's all out of the way. That's how you choose the components for your arrow shaft and your spine. So yeah, that's pretty much going to sum up the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that the video was clear and that you guys understood. If you guys have any questions, make sure you leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to read and respond to all of them. And yeah, if you guys like the video, thumbs up would be appreciated. If you guys want to see more videos just like this one, for example, in the next video, we're just going to be doing a quick like flash guide to actually building the arrows. So if you guys are interested in that, make sure you get subscribed and stay tuned because that video will be out shortly. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Ciao.